All right, we are jumping into pathogens and human illness. A couple of months ago, I think it was back in like November, we did little mini projects on viruses and bacteria where you guys had to present to the class one virus or bacteria. And now we're kind of coming full circle, but we're approaching it from the aspect of how your body and your immune system deals with these pathogens. Something called the germ theory stated that microscopic particles cause certain diseases. So Louis Pasteur, who is one of my favorite scientists, if not my all-time favorite scientist, was the one that basically came up with the germ theory. He proposed that there were little tiny microorganisms, and that's what causes disease. And this then led to a rapid advance in understanding disease. This is another huge one. You can look at this timeline, but I wanted to point out these two especially. So antiseptic techniques weren't really a thing until 1865, which is kind of crazy to think about because obviously you have to sterilize different tools and scalpels and needles and everything that you use on one person, you have to sterilize it before you use it on another person, right? Like that's just kind of common sense to us. However, that wasn't really a thing until 1865, which is pretty crazy. Up until that point, they really didn't sterilize things. So if they used a scalpel on someone, they just went over and used it on another person without really sterilizing it. Might have wiped it off, but that was probably the extent of what they did because they didn't know about sterilization or antiseptic practices. Cook's postulate supports the theory. He called disease-causing agents pathogens. So if you look here real quick, where is it? Antibiotics were found in 1928. The first antibiotic was discovered by Sir Alexander Fleming, another great scientist. He discovered penicillin. And you can read through the rest of these here. We talked about the different types of pathogens before. We said fungi, bacteria, viruses. These are all disease-causing agents. So bacteria are more complex than viruses. Remember, bacteria are alive, way more complex. Viruses are not alive. They're the ones that just are made up of a protein coat and DNA, sometimes RNA, and they insert that genetic material inside of the host cell and destroy it and take over from within. But let's go back to bacteria. So these guys are single-celled organisms. They destroy cells and they release toxic chemicals. Bacteria are alive, viruses are not. Viruses are genetic material surrounded by a protein coat. Remember, antibiotics only work on what? Think about it. Think about the answer in your head for a second. Antibiotics only work on bacteria, not viruses. Viruses force the host cells to make more viruses, and they are very, very, very teeny tiny. Now fungi, these guys can be multicellular or single-celled. They take nutrients from the host cells and occur in warm and damp places. So things like athlete's foot, jock itch, those are all, they're actually the same thing. They just call them different things, jock itch and athlete's foot. But that's an example of pathogens that are fungi. Think about it. If you have shoes on all the time, socks on all the time, the bacteria that can form on your toes are in a warm, dark, moist environment. Perfect for those fungi to live. That's why it's a good idea to be barefoot as much as possible, which I love because I love being barefoot. If I have to wear shoes, I'll usually wear flip-flops. I wear flip-flops all year round unless there's like snow on the ground. Protozoa are single-celled organisms. They use host cells to complete their life cycles. They take nutrients from the host cells, so these guys are like little parasites. Now we're talking about the bigger parasites here. These are multicellular organisms, grow and feed on a host, possibly kill the host. We've talked about pretty much all of this up until this point previously. All right, so here's some examples of different pathogens and some common infections they cause. So HIV is a virus. It spreads through bodily fluids, and it affects your immune system. There's really no cure for this. You might have seen in the news, I don't know however many months ago it was, or maybe it was like years now, but they thought they found a cure to HIV. I don't really know if anything ever came of that. They're still researching it, I believe. Pneumonia is a virus and a bacteria can cause pneumonia. which is basically just like fluid in your lungs, so that can be caused by either viruses or bacteria. It's airborne, respiratory problems, tuberculosis, bacteria, airborne, respiratory, digestive. Malaria, you guys have probably heard that before, it comes from mosquito bites. Can affect your digestive system, circulatory system, muscular system even. Hep B is a virus. You get that from contaminated food or water. Measles, influenza, you name it. The real big issue with coronavirus is obviously there wasn't a vaccine for it, which is why so many people got sick. And why so many people were freaking out because we didn't have a vaccine and really still don't yet. But the major problem with that, like versus the flu, even though sometimes the flu has worse symptoms than coronavirus, is the fact that like if you have the flu, it's not really going to cause lasting damage. However, they think that coronavirus causes lasting lung tissue damage, which is a big deal. Like you don't want it for that sole reason, among other reasons, I guess. Okay, pathogens can enter the body in different ways. So direct or indirect contact, maybe someone sneezes and you breathe in those little droplets. I was going to say sputum and droplets at the same time and it came out. Droplets. Indirect contact does not require touching an infected individual. So like maybe someone who is sick touches their nose and then they touch the table and you come and you sit at the same table and then you are sitting in the same spot they were sitting in and then you touch that infected surface, or you breathe in those little droplets that they sneezed or coughed, whatever. You don't even just have to breathe it in. Like that's what kind of makes me a little bit, I don't know, I'm not gonna say too much about coronavirus, but most upper respiratory or respiratory diseases in general, you can get by breathing in, obviously, but you can also get it through your eyes because your eyes are basically connected to your nasal passages. So if you're gonna wear a mask over your face and nose, like I feel like you should wear it over your eyes too, but then you wouldn't be able to see. So that's why the whole mask thing is I don't know. I'm not gonna state my opinion too much on that. All I'm saying is you can contract diseases through your eyes as well. So that's why they say like don't touch your face, because you don't want to touch your nose, your mouth, your eyes, because it's all connected. Nose, mouth, eyes. Vectors, we talked about this before, but like the tick would be considered what? Think about it. Think about the answer. Is the tick the vector, the deer the vector? The tick is the vector. The poor deer is just the host, the unwilling host. All right. Vectors carry the pathogen and transmit it into healthy cells. So like that tick would be the vector carrying Lyme disease if it is carrying it. Let's just assume it is. And once it bites into the deer to feed on its blood, it can actually release some of that disease into now the deer's bloodstream, and now that deer has Lyme disease. Or if a tick bites you and that tick has Lyme and you don't ever catch it in time, you can end up having Lyme disease if that tick was the vector for Lyme. Direct contact now requires touching an infected individual. So direct versus indirect, we just talked about indirect. Now we're talking about direct. So things like kissing, sexual intercourse, handshaking, those are all direct contact, obviously. So you can also contract diseases from direct contact. Also, I wanted to make a note on the previous one with indirect contact. So a surface, or like even like let's just say you're playing baseball with someone who's sick. That baseball now can indirectly get you sick because the sick individual touched that baseball. Whatever that item is that's non-living, or maybe it's even a dog's fur, so I guess that technically the dog is living, but the fur is not really living. You know what I mean? Basically anything that can house or hold onto those germs that's indirectly getting you sick is known as a fomite. Fomite, as in one word. So a fomite is anything that can indirectly get you sick because an infected individual touched it, and now you're touching that fomite or item. But little fun fact for you guys, it's called a fomite. I use that term a lot, and most people look at me like, what in the world is a fomite? But we did a lab in college, in microbiology lab, and we did all kinds of cool fomite labs where we infected just different objects like tennis balls and water bottles and tabletops and jackets and sweatshirts and lamp switches or light switches and elevator buttons, the water fountain button. And we basically infected all of them with this fake pathogen just to see how it would spread. And you would be really surprised at how many just everyday objects spread diseases really easily. Okay. Can you tell this is one of my favorite sections? I'll try to move a little quicker through it. Okay, so the immune system consists of organs, cells, and molecules that fight infections. Stay with me, guys. I know this is a long section, but this is the only video I'm making for this entire chapter. I'm just kind of squeezing it into one video, so it's going to be a little bit longer, but hang in there, pay attention, you'll be okay. This stuff is really interesting and very applicable, especially today with the whole virus thing going on. The more you know, the more you know. Sometimes the more you know, the more scared you'll be, but don't be scared. Don't consider being scared. Just the more knowledgeable you are to stay away from pathogens and diseases. Some people might call me a germaphobe, but that's okay. I'd rather be called a germaphobe and not get sick than be ignorant to all the things, viruses, and bacteria. Okay, the immune system is the body system that fights off infection and pathogens. I think you guys all know that. There's many other tissues and systems that help the immune system. So your skin is like a natural barrier. That's like your body's first line of defense. Mucous membrane traps pathogens entering the body. So like your throat is lined with mucous membranes. You have mucous membranes like in your nose. You've got mucous membranes everywhere to help pathogens. Basically, like the pathogens stick to it and they get engulfed by some sort of cell in your body, and then you don't get sick. Now, if the infectious dose is higher than what your body can handle, that's usually when you will contract the disease or get sick. Circulatory system transports immune cells. When we talked about blood, we talked a little bit about the white blood cell and how those greatly affect your immune system. They're very helpful. They're necessary for your immune system, and the circulatory system is what helps circulate them through your body. Cells and proteins fight the body's infections. White blood cells attack infections inside the body. Phagocytes engulf and destroy the pathogens. T cells destroy infected cells, and B cells produce antibodies. The T cells are called T cells because they are made by the thymus gland, and the B cells are called B cells because they're made by bone marrow, so they just call them T cells and B cells for short in case you're wondering why they're called T cells and B cells. There you go. There's different types of white blood cells. So the phagocytes would include basophil, mast cells, neutrophils, macrophage, lymphocyte, and eosinophils. And then you can read what all their functions are. Three types of proteins fight off invading pathogens. Complement proteins weaken pathogen membranes. Antibodies make pathogens ineffective. And interferons prevent viruses from infecting healthy cells. They basically interfere with them, which is why we call them interferons. What an antibody basically does is, I'll kind of just explain this really quickly and as concisely as possible because there's a lot of detail in it and it gets complicated. But I will just give you the general overview of an antibody. So like, let's say you get sick with, I don't know, the flu strand that was going around 2 years ago. If that flu ever comes back, that same exact strand ever comes back, or a very similar one, you're probably not going to get the flu because you've already had that strand before. Or if you get vaccinated against the flu year after year, then your body has antibodies against so many different strands of the flu, which makes it very unlikely that you really will ever get the flu. And that's why it's important to get your flu shot every year. They try to make a prediction with the vaccine every year as to what that flu strand is going to be, but they're not always correct. So just because you get the flu shot does not mean you're not going to get the flu that year. You could get the flu shot and still get the flu that year because it was a different strand. They just predicted it wrong. However, if you get the flu shot year after year, your chances of getting the flu after you've had the flu shot year after year after year after year, your body has so many different antibodies against different strands of the flu, you're most likely not going to get the flu, which is really nice, and that's why it's super important to get the flu shot every year. So people who say that they get the flu shot, or they got the flu shot once or twice or even 5 times and they still get the flu every year. Well, that makes sense. That probably is because they don't get it year after year after year after year. Immunity prevents a person from getting sick from a pathogen. So, and all immunity pathogens are destroyed before you get sick. That should not be. Oh, wait, never mind. Okay, sorry. I was thinking as I was reading. Passive immunity occurs without an immune response. So passive immunity is something like when a baby is drinking its mother's milk. That's passive immunity because it's getting immunity from the mother's milk. And genetics. Unfortunately, that one's kind of just like you get what you get sort of thing with genetics. Active immunity, however, occurs after a specific immune response. So if you get sick, you're probably not going to get that same sickness later on because your body has built up antibodies against it. If you're around someone who has a sickness you've already had, you really can't get it. So no worries there because your immune system has built up antibodies against it. Also, it's really important, this is random, and I feel like not a lot of high school textbooks touch on this because it's more, at least our textbook is kind of old. It's more of a recent study, like within the last 5-10 years. But babies who are formula fed they usually don't have nearly as good of an immune system all throughout the rest of their lives as babies who drank their mother's milk for at least a year. Sometimes they recommend up to 3 years, but I mean, yeah. So up to a year, if you, as a baby, drank mostly your mother's milk, then your immune system is probably stronger than someone else's immune system who was fed formula milk as a baby. That's why it's a really, really important thing to breastfeed your babies instead of giving them formula. The immune system has many responses to pathogens and foreign cells, so let's get into some of those immune responses. Oops. Many body systems work to produce non-specific responses. So what are these? These are the same for every pathogen. So in inflammation, blood vessels become leaky, and I kind of want to put that in quotes, leaky. White blood cells move towards infection and damaged tissue. They're characterized by swelling, redness, and pain. So let's just use the paper cut example I used, I think it was last week or 2 weeks ago when we were talking about blood. If you get a paper cut on your finger, it's probably going to get, obviously it's going to bleed right away first, right, if it's a deep enough one. And then it's going to start to get really red around that area. It might even be kind of puffy and swollen. It's going to hurt a little bit if you push on it. Now, this is just a paper cut, so not a severe thing at all, but I'm just using it as an example. But once it stops bleeding, it might even still be a little red and puffy. It might even be warm to the touch, or if you've ever gotten a bee sting before and it got puffy and red and it was warm to the touch, or if you have a major cut or gash somewhere, it's going to be kind of puffy around the area and warm to the touch. And that's because your body is sending more blood to that area. Your body just knows to do that, which is pretty amazing. Fevers are your body's way of trying to kill off whatever that pathogen is. However, if a fever gets too high, this can actually cause, in extreme cases, death. Cause seizures, brain damage, even death. And that's because it's actually too hot for like the proteins in your body and just your different cellular functions. If you get too warm, then it can cause major damage to the rest of your body, even death. Specific immune responses begin with the detection of antigens. So your body has to be able to detect what's itself and what's not itself, or what's foreign first before it attacks it, because your body, you don't want it to be attacking its own cells. So there's something called antigens that are surface proteins on pathogens, and antibodies are what recognize those if your body has those antibodies for that particular pathogen. And each pathogen has a different antigen. So these little guys are representative of antigens, and this whole thing is a virus. There are two specific immune responses. So you've got the cellular immunity, which uses T cells that are coming from the thymus to destroy infected body cells. So let's look at this diagram real quick here. These are memory T cells. So if you've had the sickness before, those little yellow things are like the little flags, very specific shape. specific, I'm just using an example here. Let's say it's a little circle like their little example, and if they come into contact with a pathogen like this guy here, then your body's going to be able to say, hey, we remember you, you're not good, we're going to flag you and destroy you. And that's basically what happens. Your T cells are kind of just laying dormant until they come into contact with an antigen that it recognizes, and that's when it will activate, will become activated T cells. Sometimes you have to get booster shots, or you have to re-up your, what word am I looking for? A very common word. Gosh, why am I blanking right now? It's basically like what you get, vaccine, there we go, vaccination. You might have to re-up a vaccination because some vaccinations, your body will keep those antibodies for your entire life. Some, it'll only be a couple months. Some, it'll be only a couple of years. Some might be a lot of years. So that's why you usually have to re-up your vaccinations. Some vaccines you don't, though. All right, there are two specific immune responses. You have the humoral immunity, which uses B cells coming from your bone marrow to produce antibodies. So let's just look at these. All these little Y-shaped things are antibodies. These are the activated B cells. So your B memory cells are kind of laying dormant until they're activated. Your T cells can also activate them, but this is just showing you kind of similar to the T cells of what's happening. So both responses produce memory cells, so they're laying dormant in your body until they recognize something. And then they'll flag them to attack them. So you have specialized T and B cells, and they provide acquired active immunity. Your immune system rejects foreign tissues, which is why sometimes your body will reject a organ donation. So if you have like a transplant, let's say you have a kidney transplant, and your body recognizes it obviously as not its own, so it can actually attack it and kill it because your body is smart enough to know that's not mine. So there's a lot of medications they put you on if you do go through an organ transplant or tissue transplant. And that's because of your immune system. That means your body is working the way it should. However, you're going to need a kidney, and technically you only need one, even though you have two. You really only need one to survive. But if you don't have any kidneys, that's a problem. So if you have a kidney transplant and it's the only working one that you have, and it's starting to fail because your body's attacking it, you're going to die because you need a kidney. So that's why they give you medication to kind of override that immune response. It's basically your body is making antibodies against the donor's tissue. All right, so good hygiene, living in a clean environment, and building immunity helps keep a person healthy. Quick side note, if you, let's just say you were a super hypochondriac, the person who's really afraid of getting sick, and you stay in all the time and you never go out and see the light of day, never are around people, you are going to have a very, very weak immune system because your body has never gotten little doses of different diseases to be able to build up antibodies against it. So as soon as you go out, you're probably going to get sick. So it's good to be exposed to things. You just have to take precautions for it and get your vaccines. All right, so antibodies and antiseptic cause pathogens to burst. Antiseptics kill pathogens outside of the body. They do not target specific pathogens. Examples include vinegar and soap, so washing your hands with soap or cleaning your counters with vinegar. Some people do that as a natural alternative. Some people use Clorox type things to clean things or bleach type things. Chlorhexidine is what hospitals use, and that's a super high grade one that kills everything. Hand sanitizer. Antibiotics, though, kill pathogens inside the body, so these target one specific bacterium or fungus. Remember, antibiotics do not work on viruses. Antibiotic resistance can cause medicines to become ineffective. Some Antibiotics are topical, meaning you put them like on your skin on the outside directly. You don't like swallow a pill or drink the medicine or whatever, but it's still causing a response inside the body. Some bacteria in a population have genes that make them immune to antibiotics. If you don't go through your full course of antibiotics, we talked about all this, but if you don't go through the full course, then you can actually cause mutations, and then those mutant ones will actually cause a new strand of bacteria, and then you have to come up with more different antibiotics and stuff, and then the previous ones don't work anymore. That's why it's super important to take your entire dose of antibiotics, whatever you're prescribed by the doctor. We talked about vaccines before. I'm going to kind of breeze through these because we've talked about all this before. All right, vaccines provide immunity, stimulate specific immune response. They cause memory cells to be produced. This is how vaccines work. They allow the immune system to respond quickly to infection, and they have a fast response. A person will not get sick, so it's a really quick response. Very rarely do we use like a dead strain of the flu or disease or virus, whatever it is. It's usually like a synthetic one, but they can still use dead strains of it. But basically, it's similar enough to the real deal that your body can produce those memory cells without you ever getting sick. That's what the vaccine is. So here's a summary of what vaccines do and how they do it. An overactive immune system, though, can make the body very unhealthy. So I'll give you a little example of, a very minor example, though, of myself. I had an overactive immune system when it came to allergies one year. And this was, oh man, the pollen was horrible this year. And it was like, lasted like months. I felt like just one of my eyes, I don't remember if it was my left one or my right one, just was like watering all the time, nonstop. And it was just like super red and like just itchy, and it was super annoying, but it was just one of them. And I think it was because my body was having an overactive immune system towards the pollen. For whatever reason, it was really only affecting my one eye that would just constantly like water. So it looked like I was crying for like a week or two straight. But it was very annoying. But that was probably because of an overactive immune system. Now, that was a very small scale. There can be larger scales of this where it's a huge problem. Okay, allergies occur when the immune system responds to harmless antigens. An allergy is a response to a harmless antigen. They're caused by allergens. Allergens are things like pollen. They cause inflammation responses. Sometimes if you're severely allergic to something, like if you go into anaphylactic shock, or let's say you're really allergic to bee stings, and then it makes your like throat swell up, obviously that's not a good idea, right? Or like a good thing. So it's better, even though it's normal for your body to cause inflammation to try to kill off whatever that allergen is, if it's causing you to not be able to breathe and therefore you're going to die, obviously we don't want that to happen. So that's why things like EpiPens exist, or antihistamines exist. Claritin, for example, is an antihistamine for allergies. And as annoying as they are, allergies really are not that big of a deal, but it's still nice to have meds to be able to kind of make that side effect go away. So foods, peanuts, milk, wheat, etc., those are types of food that can cause allergies. Some allergens are airborne, like pollen, dust mites, feces, mold, etc. If you ever want to know what pollen looks like, this is what it looks like. It looks like those medieval spiky balls, those metal ones, whatever they're called. Like, duh, no wonder they irritate your eyes and throat and nose. They're literally like spiky. There's chemical ones as well, so like nickel, medicine, bee stings, etc. Some people are allergic to different types of metals, like my ears are sensitive to just some different cheaper metals, which is why I can't wear certain earrings. Some people are highly allergic, so they can't even wear like necklaces or anything touching their skin that's a specific metal. Dust mites are really gross looking. Cat dander, that's gross looking too. Allergens can cause anaphylaxis. Kind of talked about that. That's just an extreme inflammation response. It can cause your throat to swell up and then you not be able to breathe. Blood vessels and airways become too porous. If not treated immediately, it can cause death. Autoimmune diseases are when white blood cells attack your body's healthy cells. So obviously you don't want your body to attack itself, right? You don't want your immune system to be attacking its own self. Autoimmune diseases are failures of the immune system. So your white blood cells can't recognize healthy cells. They attack healthy body cells, and then your tissues fail because of your body's attacking itself. There are all kinds of different autoimmune diseases. So like rheumatoid arthritis, type 1 diabetes, Hashimoto's thyroiditis, multiple sclerosis, Graves' disease. These are all different autoimmune diseases that are really serious. All right, last section here. When the immune system is weakened, the body cannot fight off disease. Leukemia is characterized by abnormal white blood cells. If you've ever known anyone with leukemia, I used to know this little girl who has Down syndrome, and she's still alive, but super sweet. Her name is Sarah, and I babysat her a lot when I was younger. And she had leukemia, and the way they found out she had leukemia was she would get bruises super easily, and they took her to the doctor and found out she actually had leukemia. So she was treated for cancer, and now she's totally cancer-free of that, which is awesome. But leukemia is cancer of the bone marrow, and it's characterized by immature white blood cells. And it causes a weakened immune system. It can also cause you to bruise really easily. Now, I bruise really easily and I don't have leukemia, so I'm not saying that to scare you. If you bruise really easily, it's probably not because you have leukemia, okay? Generally speaking, girls tend to bruise a little bit more easily. I don't know why that is, but I mean, I have to look into that. Maybe I'll do that today and then I'll let you guys know. But I feel like I bruise really easily, but I don't have leukemia, don't worry. People with leukemia, like, you could barely touch them, or they could, like, kind of just run into the wall just a little bit and they'll get a bruise, like a huge bruise. Leukemia leads to opportunistic infections, occur because white blood cells cannot fight infections. If the immune system were healthy, they would fight these infections. Sorry, I'm reading as I'm thinking about things. I'm trying to multitask, and that doesn't work very well. We talked about HIV before, but HIV targets the immune system. It's called the human immunodeficiency virus. It's called a retrovirus. That's like the category that it's in. And it basically attacks your immune system, which is why it's such a huge problem. And people with HIV have a very weakened immune system and can catch all kinds of other diseases while they have HIV because their immune system is weakened by HIV. And HIV is transmitted by mixing infected blood with bodily fluid. Which is why if you ever like come into contact with blood, like let's say you're even just cleaning up, like, I don't know, someone was bleeding and they dripped on the floor and you're like, oh, don't worry, I'll get a paper towel and clean it up. Be really careful. You never know who has what disease. So you might be cleaning up this blood. Let's just an extreme case example. Let's say that person had HIV, and let's say you had a little paper cut on your finger that you forgot about from earlier that morning. You're wiping up the blood with a paper towel. It seeps through the paper towel a little bit, gets in your cut. Now you've got HIV, which is like a huge bummer. So be very careful. Don't handle bodily fluids without gloves. HIV infection leads to AIDS. HIV reproduces in and destroys T cells. So remember, your T cells help with your immune system. The body cannot replace T cells fast enough, so your body basically can never overcome it. So people with AIDS have a very low amount of T cells. All right, that's the end of chapter 31. You might have to refer back to this long video throughout the rest of this week. But if you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me and ask me, and we'll continue with chapter 31 the rest of this week.